Hey everybody, I just wanted to check in and make sure you all understand how we operationalize this rubric. To operationalize just means to make something abstract concrete. So, for example, in psychology, we will often say, well, what is happiness? And we have to come up with ways to measure happiness. And actually, there is a test for happiness. And what we do is we operationalize happiness through a test called the subjective well being test. And it gives us a quantifiable measure of happiness. All that is to say is that for you guys, it's important you know what makes an A and a B a B. And this little box, the paper demonstrates clear organization following topic, sentence, evidence, discussion, analytical structure for all body paragraphs and clear transitions between ideas. That doesn't mean anything to you yet. That's what you're here to learn. And so this video will help you understand this part of the rubric. So what I've done here is I put the thesis in because the thesis is going to matter for us as we move through this. Just to remind you, the thesis is, while I enjoy reading narratives, I struggle to read things I find boring or too difficult. The first thing I have to prove in that thesis organizationally is that I enjoy reading narratives. I want to tie that back to my reading skills because that's sort of the point of this paper. I'm using the enjoyment of that to talk about those skills. And so my claim coming down is narratives really drive me to want to read more and understand the story being presented. So I'm proving here that I enjoy reading them and that because I enjoy reading them, they're driving me to want to read more and understand more. What really works well in this paragraph is how I discuss the driven nature of it. I use words like captivating here, right? It's a captivating narrative. I have a direct quote. You don't always need a direct quote. And in fact, here I would argue that I didn't really need this direct quote. It was just a very simple direct quote to put in. And I think it adds a lot of ethos, right? There's a lot of credibility because I'm saying this thing is strangling you. But that's one thing. It's another thing to see the quote from her adding both credibility because I'm saying exactly what she's saying, but also emotions because it's such an emotional, something wraps around itself, something that very nearly choked you, and that you-ness comes through. And my audience might respond in the same way we did. But what's most important here that I really want you guys to see is look how much discussion happens. The discussion is the entire bottom portion of this document, from here to here. A good paragraph will start with a clear claim, will provide evidence, and then we'll have a huge discussion about how that evidence proves both the claim and the thesis. So here, I'm trying to prove that I really enjoy narratives, and that because I enjoy them, I'm driven to understand what I'm reading better, and I'm driven to read more of things. And so that's the goal here, is that I'm working through that idea. A lot of times with you guys, what we see is that you just sort of reiterate the point. Notice I'm not reiterating the point here. I don't just keep talking about I enjoyed reading it. I'm talking about how I enjoyed reading it. I'm getting into the details of wanting to answer a question, wanting to know what was being developed. And then I add in new evidence. And notice the new evidence does not have a direct quote. It's just you want to know whether you come back. And if our audience has read the story, which we can assume they have, that's just more evidence to how the questions of this narrative are driving me to want to understand the narrative and want to read more of her stories. That's what makes this an A paper. All of that discussion, all of that movement, it doesn't just keep restating that I enjoy narratives. So let's move on to the B paper. Here you can start to see this is just the bacon section. We still have that claim. That claim is still good. Whenever I find myself bored by reading, I just want to ignore it and stop reading. That's a skill problem. That's a struggle I'm having. That's great. But notice that there's no quote in here anymore. Notice it's a lot of me talking without any real evidence from the text, right? I can't prove a lack of narrative in a simple struggle, but I can prove his use of language is hard. It's boring. If you go back to the model, you can actually compare these two and see how just so much is changed by the removal of that evidence. And that's why evidence is such an important part. We've messed with that model, topic sense evidence discussion, and it's really ruined the argument here. I've started to pull out other evidences of things we've talked in class. But again, the evidence here should be coming from Bacon. I'm making an argument about how Bacon was boring. And all I've said is that it's not a narrative. That doesn't help me see that non-boring nature of it. So that's where we start to see that struggle. If I had put in that evidence, if you go back and look at the other paragraph, the evidence makes it a lot more clear, again, building ethos, credibility, and making it far more logical, because you can start to see the connection between evidence and what I'm saying. Without evidence, it's not very logical. It becomes a logical fallacy, as a matter of fact. And then lastly, let's look at the C paper. Narratives are good for reading. Here I've messed with the entire claim. Like, the claim is gone. Notice the claim doesn't connect to my thesis anymore, and it doesn't give me anything to analyze in my reading skills, right? I just said they're really good for reading. Nothing here is going to prove that they're good for reading. So the goal here is that you start to see that this system is required. It's kind of second nature to us. As people who argue in the real world, we do this a lot. And we expect people to understand, but the minute you move into a paper format, you can't trust your audience to just understand who you are anymore. You're not talking to them. You can't trust them to understand your perspective. Everything you have has to be on the page. And so if you don't put it on the page, we don't see it. And here we're not really seeing a connection between how they're good for reading and how I responded to that goodness of reading. Right? The first claim was much more clear, that because I like them, I'm driven to read them and understand them better. I provided evidence that showed the questions being posed in in the short story, and how those questions were driving me to want to understand and do better. So hopefully this helps you understand what we're looking for in a good organizationally argument, right? And the intro leads into that thesis. The thesis stands alone and it controls the whole paper. The thesis is logical because I'm going to talk about narratives first, and then I'm going to talk about being bored, and then I'm going to talk about it being too hard. That structure moves throughout the paper, and it ends cathartically on how I plan to overcome the boring or difficult nature of some things I'm going to have to read in college. So that's this grade. Again, it's a holistic grade. It's looking at the whole paper. That's what makes it the most important. All these things should flow together very fluidly. If you're working from an outline, you should have other people read it. That's what peer reviews are for. Remember that in revision, the goal of your peer reviewer isn't to tell you how to fix things, it's to tell you what they think is wrong. It's your responsibility to fix things, because they may not know what's wrong, or they may not have your idea. So please just work through these ideas. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me and I will answer them as fast as I can. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed our readings and you are reflecting well on your practices for your own personal growth.